You are currently in perspective. This is the YouTube version / rendition of In Perspective, and I really appreciate you clicking on this podcast. So, without further ado, here's the scheduled program. And just like that, this podcast is now live. In Perspective is what you're on right now, listening to me, Tyler, speak into my microphone. It's very crazy how this is already starting. I've already kind of thought of a name, came up with a pretty crappy logo for the picture or for the artwork, but this podcast is going to be something that's either going to fail or it could possibly do something interesting. This is going to be mainly focused on photography experiences, stories, any like projects that I'm doing, any past projects. I've already got a few ideas for this podcast for the next few episodes. I already have a couple guests rounded up for many different stories. One is going to be about a previous project I did for my school, actually, and that is called Michael the Stapler. Anyone who's familiar with me is familiar with that short film thing that we made. So my friend Devin should be joining within a future episode here very shortly, so be on the lookout for that. I also have a friend who we went out for a little photo shoot. We traveled a little bit, got some really cool Shenandoah Skyline Drive sort of shots in Virginia, so I'm going to try and get her on the podcast, and we're going to talk about some stuff there. So really, I have a few ideas for this podcast, and for this first one, it's going to be mainly focused on just getting to know me and getting to know why I even started photography in the first place, and how photography has gotten me here in front of a microphone talking about photography. And it's just very crazy how it's all became one big circle of starting photography, learning about photography, watching a lot of basics, learning about ISO, aperture, shutter speed, that whole exposure triangle, and then learning about long exposures and light painting when it comes to car photography, and learning about poses for portraits, and learning about different lightings. It's all become second nature to me when it comes to actually understanding that stuff. And you don't really think about it when you're doing photography. You think, oh, photography is just taking a picture, when really there's so much more to it. And I know that's so cliche to say, but there's so much more to it, and the more you do it, the more you realize that it's really nothing to overthink unless you're doing something crazy. But I've just really realized doing photography is like it's like muscle memory. Like once you do it for a while, you slowly start to kind of get in this groove of, before is like, oh, taking a picture of a leaf, that was the only sort of photography I would do. And then the more you get used to your camera, or the more you get used to taking photos, the more versatile your photos will become. But that's like completely off topic to talk about. But I kind of wanted to just briefly talk about how I even got into photography for those who don't even know. There's a little bit of a backstory on why I'm even in photography, and how I'm slowly starting a business within photography. So okay, let's back up a little bit. It was about 2019, I think. 2019. Yeah, it was 2019. And it was around August of 2019 that I started taking really boring pictures on my phone of my dogs. And I remember my mom called me out into the front yard, and there was this praying mantis. And it was like this creepy looking thing hanging off a tomato plant or whatever. And I brought my phone out. She was like, take a picture, take a picture. So, I just brought out my camera, and I got close up to it, took a close up of the praying mantis, and I was like, this is kind of cool, taking a picture of something. And at the time, like now it's not impressive, but like seeing a blurry background on a photo back then was so dope. And even though I use like Instagram's filters to quote unquote edit the photo, I was like, there's so much more I can do with photos than just taking a picture. Like back then I didn't know anything. Like all I used was my phone to take pictures, and I would use Instagram's filters to maybe adjust the exposure, and that was about it, or apply a filter. And as soon as I got that praying mantis photo and my mom posted it on Facebook, people were like, he needs to get into photography, blah, blah, blah. And it just randomly popped into my head that maybe photography is really cool. And this may sound really, really dumb, but I was really into Riverdale back then, and we all know Riverdale has Cole Sprouse, and Cole Sprouse is obviously an amazing actor. We all knew that. But one thing I didn't know at the time was he was actually really into photography. And at the time, photography was this like crazy cool aesthetic, to me at least. And seeing him talk about photography and seeing a few videos of him doing photography, it kind of really inspired me. And I watched countless videos on him doing photography things. Like there was this interview, and I don't remember what it was for. It was for like a smaller YouTube channel, and he was talking to someone. They were sitting at like a park, and he was talking about how photography has kind of helped him through, I guess, lesser, darker moments in his life or whatever, and is kind of an inspiration or I guess you could say a way to express his feelings, whatever you want to call it. And I found that interesting, so I slowly got into, okay, how do I do this? And my grandma had a Fujifilm S2000 HD, some crappy camera. Couldn't even change the aperture. Well, you could, but you had to go through all these different menus. It was more of like a point-and-shoot sort of camera. And that's kind of the first camera I've really used. And it was very frustrating using that thing, because after watching videos on how to change aperture, how to change ISO, and how to change shutter speed, the camera was so convoluted on what you were doing. You had to go into so many different menus just to change the shutter speed, so many menus just to change the ISO. And at the time, I barely knew anything. Like I really didn't know anything. So I was guessing on what ISO and aperture and shutter really were. I slowly got the hang of that. And at the time, one of my teachers, this was towards maybe October, my teacher had an old Canon F1 that it was a film camera, and she lended me that, and I used that for about maybe 2 months or so, and that's the camera that really got me into photography. And I'm just going to throw this out there. If you're trying to get into photography, definitely, absolutely, most indefinitely use a film camera some point in your early stages of photography, as it just, if you don't know what ISO and aperture and shutter speed really do, or what they do, using a film camera will definitely sharpen your skills. It's more of a trial and error sort of thing, and you're going to have to make sure you have a little bit of money saved up to spend on film and getting it processed. And it does take a really big tax on your wallet, but at the end, it's really worth it. Especially looking now, I looked at some of my old film photos from over a year and a half ago, and it's crazy how much you can change as a photographer and how much you can change as an art style as a photographer. And so after looking back at those, using a film camera, it's more of a style than it is I guess you could say it's more a style than it is technical, if you look at it in a certain way. So back then, I was using the camera as more of an artistic value rather than, what I do now, which is taking pictures of people and trying to... Right now, more photography for me is more of a business. It's more of a way to get, I guess, money, per se. Photography, it hasn't been an artistic value like it was back when I first started. But anyway, I'll talk about how photography for me has personally changed. But back then, it was more of just an art, and using that film camera was art. And getting back those photos from a photo lab, it was very intriguing, very inspiring to see how overexposed, how underexposed, or how terrible the composition was for these photos. But back then I didn't really care. It was more or less just what was I photographing and what made it interesting. So I did that for about 2 months using that camera. I believe it had a 35mm lens, and I used that practically the whole time I had the camera, because I didn't really know how to interchange lenses yet, which is like very basic, but I just didn't know you could do that really. So I did that. It took me literally a week just to figure out how to put film into the camera. But after I figured that out, I slowly learned how the light meter on the thing works, how to figure all that out. And it was very tedious. It was very time and money consuming. But at the end of the day, I really do believe using a film camera really improves you as a photographer. So after that, I saved up for a Fuji X-T3, which is literally the camera I use almost on every single shoot. It is the only camera I use right now. And after I got that camera, that's when things just kind of skyrocketed in my photography world, I guess. Back then, it's kind of nostalgic. It's kind of crazy to think that when I first got the camera, it was so new, so refreshing, so interesting to use for the first time, because I've never used a almost a $2,000 camera, which it was almost a $2,000 camera with just the base, or with just the body itself. But I got it on a deal with the kit lens for about $1,700, I believe. But anyway, yeah, I got that, and it was so new, it was so refreshing, so interesting, because I could physically change the aperture with the ring. I could also change the ISO and aperture right on top of, or not the aperture, the ISO and shutter speed right on top of the camera. And what I really love about the X-T3 is how it almost reminds me of a film camera. How just the body of it looks, I guess. It's very retro, very vintage looking. And that's what it really intrigued me with the camera when I first got it. So I used that extensively. I brought it to school with me. I did everything I could with it for a good 6 months maybe, to about, I got it in November of 2019, and used it heavily until about, I want to say maybe September. No, not September, maybe April. And then things slowly slowed down for me photography-wise. Some personal stuff happened, and then I got back into photography almost as a business. After I had my first wedding shoot, which I'll talk about more extensively in a different, I guess, episode or whatever. But after that first wedding shoot, and after I realized you can use photos to make money, which I knew was a thing, but at the time I was like, how am I even going to make money doing photography? And then it slowly became this realization of, if I put out enough work that impresses people, enough work that people will pay for, such as portraits, weddings, couple shoots, whatever you want to call them, engagement shoots, people will pay a lot of money to get those. And once you build your portfolio, people will just start coming in left and right, depending on what kind of photography you do. Obviously, you have to put your name out there. Obviously, you're going to have to approach people. Obviously, you're going to have to do a lot of work to make yourself known. But once you do, you can really start to kind of get this snowball effect of how many people are approaching you with projects that they want you to do, or shoots that they want you to do. And one thing I've noticed after that wedding is, if you approach people and you impress them with your work, they will more than likely tell their friends about it, and those friends will tell their friends. And then, like I said, it kind of turns into this big snowball effect. Recently, I haven't been doing nearly as many weddings. I've been doing a lot of car shoots, which has been my favorite type of photography by far. But doing that, you really, at least for car photography, which in itself isn't exactly a demanding type of photography, like weddings or engagements or portraits for that matter. But I did notice that when one person gets car shots done, another one follows. They will tell their friends, especially if they're really into the car scene. Like after I did a Supra, one of his friends approached me about it, and after I did, I think it was the BMW shoot, what is it, 325, I did that shoot, and one of his friends approached me. So really, no matter what kind of photography you're in, you can really start to get word of mouth by how much you impress someone, I guess, or how much work you have under your belt. So how much you have in your portfolio is going to determine how much, or how many people are going to want to like have you work for them or work with you, whatever. And I kind of realized that the more work you put out, the more you approach people with certain things, the more you approach people, with something you're dedicated and passionate about, the more likely you're gonna find I guess a steady flow of work. So right now it's car photography, and right now I'm getting a steady flow of people who want me to take car photos of them, for them, or just a matter of, oh, you did this for me, can you do this for me? Like when I did the Shelby GT500 shoot, somebody approached me, or the wife of who owned the Shelby, they wanted me to do dog photos, or pet photos, I guess, more appropriate name for it. I did that for them. I impressed them with that. And now a couple of their friends want me to do shoots for them of their family and their pets. Which, is that car photography? Is that the route I'm wanting to go down specifically? No. But you got to remember, as a photographer, you got to branch out. You're not going to be able to make a living off just car photography unless you're very lucky. And unless you're doing weddings, that can depend on how much you're making. But with car photography, I am going to have to branch out to like weddings and pet photography and portrait photography and all these other types of photography, which is really cool because it'll, build my skill. So basically what I'm trying to say is you can do whatever type of photography you want, and you can probably make some sort of steady flow of clients come in if you approach them first. You approach other people first. That will get your name out and start, the snowball effect. And I just kind of realized I'm kind of off topic about the whole backstory of how I even started photography, which is fine. It's just photography started as an artistic value, an aesthetic. Now it's more or less just a business approach, I guess. And what I'm starting to notice, which is kind of depressing, is that photography is less as an art, as an abstract art, than it is it's more like like I mentioned, it's kind of, I'm doing this more for a business standpoint at this point. So right now I haven't really done photography as an art per se. I would love to. It's just a matter of, once you've done it for a while, for over 2 years, which isn't long at all, now I'm more focused on just making people impressed with my work and having people approach me for more work rather than me taking photos to create a story of art. Now, by no means am I saying photography is not an art. It is definitely an art. It's a skill, it's an art, it's a creative outlet. But what I'm trying to say is, before, when I first started photography, I would take a photo and create a story within it. And if I get a good photo of a landscape or an architecture or some sort of abstract looking photo, I will definitely make an imaginary story, and I'll write it down. But more or less, photography, once you find out that photography can be used as a business, as a financial, a financial base almost, and create a living off of it, you start to realize that you can do photography more than just creating a photo that is a piece of art. You can create photos that are pieces of art, and then you realize you can also create photos that impress people and want them to work with you and want them to incorporate your photography into their business, into their whatever it may be. So with car photography, people approach me per se, and they want photos done for their website, for their commercial reasons or whatever, for their ads. And I've kind of realized that's a big market is photography. You can make a lot of money for product photography, for, like I said, wedding photography, for car photography. There's a lot of market in there and a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money off of it. And once you realize you can make a lot of money off of photography, once you get your name out there, then it becomes this weird transition from, oh, I'm doing photography for the aesthetic, for the art. And then you realize, oh, I can also make a lot of money off of it and do it to not impress people, but to to help people out within their business, I guess, or photography as a wedding. It can be used either way. Let's just say that, because now I'm starting to complicate what I'm trying to say. There's obviously a lot of people who make money. I don't know if it's a lot of money, but make money off of creating aesthetic photography, I guess. Like Alan, I cannot remember his last name, but he's a street photographer in London. If you know anything about street photography, the name Alan, I can't think of his last name. I can never remember it because it's always kind of weird. But if you know anything about street photography, you probably know who I'm talking about. But he does a lot of street photography. He does amazing work in street photography. And I don't know if he makes a lot of money off of it, but he gets a lot of recognition. So, not saying you can't do photography as an artistic value in creating like art compared to like wedding photography, which is still art, but it's the aesthetic of art as a whole compared to the more commercial business side of photography and the art of that, I guess you could say. So what I'm trying to say is I'm leaning more towards the commercial business side of photography more than I was before with the whole storytelling within photography. So take that as you will. I kind of want to lean towards more. I want to lean this episode more towards what I guess you can do as a photographer. So basically, anything that you think photography can be used. So photography can be used for commercial reasons. It can be used for ad reasons. It can be used for artistic reasons. Maybe you want to make photography and do it as a more of a gallery show. You want to create photos that are gallery worthy compared to maybe product photography, which is billboard worthy or print worthy for a magazine. Excuse me, I had to drink a little water. But that's something that I'm starting to realize is, how do I incorporate photography within different brands, different commercial industries, such as, like I've repeated like 10 times already, like car photography, like product photography, wedding photography. Those are the business photographies, or the photographies that you can incorporate into a business, I guess you could say. Those are the photographies I'm really leaning into as of recent. And what I'm starting to realize is those types of photographies, is that even a word? Anyway, photography as a business standpoint, it starts, a negative thing I've really realized while being in the business side of photography, it starts to lose its purpose. And I've noticed that for a good few months now, as it starts to lose its, as I've mentioned, its art. You're just posting, or you're just taking photos for a client, you're editing them, and then you're just sending them off. There's no real story to them. There's no real reasoning behind them except to make money and to promote something. And that's what's kind of getting depressing about photography, in my opinion, is once you go down this hole that I'm going down, or that hole, whatever you want to say, it starts to not lose value. It's not that photography is less interesting. It's just more the creativity isn't there as much. Not saying I can't go out, travel, and get photos, but once you start to get almost overwhelmed in the business of photography, it becomes less about your camera and more about your clients, which may or may not make sense. But if you're into photography, and once you get to that point where you're trying to create a business, and you're also taking photos for that business or your clients within your business, it becomes more about the clients than it does about the photos. And that's one thing that's kind of discouraging about being a photographer within a business, or having your own business as a photographer. It can get a little dull, I guess. And I've noticed that gets very, very apparent the more I do photos for clients, and the more it just gets kind of numbing. It's not, for car photography, I do get very excited when I take a photo of a really extravagant looking car. But I don't think I'm going to look back on it 5 years down the line and be like, I remember the story behind that photo, compared to looking at one of my photos on my wall right now, which is a old abandoned looking church, which is a typical cliche type of photo. But it was one of my first few hundred photos I ever took with my X-T3. And I remember exactly what I was doing, and exactly what friend I was with at the time. And I remember doing that. But these car photos, even though I can remember where I was and what I was doing because they're relatively new, 2-3 years down the line, I'm not going to remember that. So that's, if you're not getting what I'm putting down right now, it's just a matter of the story behind the photo starts to lose itself once you're taking photos for clients and you're just doing it for the financial stability rather than the story and the art of the photo. I don't know. I don't even know if that even makes sense, but it gets, I guess, mind-numbing just taking photos of people in their cars. It's very rewarding because you get to build your portfolio, but it's different taking photos of whatever, mostly street photography and landscape photography, because usually you're going out maybe with a friend and you're taking these photos while traveling and getting to talk to your friend who's also maybe taking photos. You remember those stories. But working at a dealership, being a freelancer for a dealership, and taking photos for their cars, depending on the car, sure, you may remember getting to drive it, and you may get to tell your friends, oh, I drove a Porsche 911 or an Audi RS7. You'll remember that. But you won't remember a conversation you had. You won't remember the backstory behind the photo compared to a car photo, I guess. Take that as you will. But that's just one thing I'm slowly starting to realize as I get more into the whole business side of photography. But as a first podcast, I think I've covered a decent amount, actually. I feel like I probably repeated a lot of stuff. And I don't know if I hope a lot of what I've said even made sense. But that's one thing that this podcast is probably going to have a lot of, is me repeating things, just saying it differently, because sometimes I say something and then it doesn't make sense when I say it, so I try to repeat it to make it make sense. Does that make sense? Who knows? But I appreciate you. Hopefully you listened to the ending of this. If you did, you're a troop, and I appreciate you. So for the next few episodes of In Perspective, I'm going to be focusing on past projects, since those have happened and I have a little bit of stories behind past projects, obviously. I'm going to hopefully get a couple friends on here that I can talk to who worked on Michael the Stapler with me, and see if we can get a little bit of a podcast off of that, or an episode off of that. So just be in tune. Just be paying attention and see what comes out. So with that being said, you're currently in Perspective, and I am Tyler. See, I don't even know what to say for the ending. Like that, I was thinking for the intro, a good intro would be, thank you for tuning in. Currently, you are listening. No. Let me say that again. Thank you for tuning in. You are currently in Perspective. I am Tyler speaking. Something like that. Something with me saying, you are currently in Perspective. Something like that. Something cliche, but something that says the title of the podcast within the intro. Either way, I'm going to be ending this now. I really hope you enjoyed some of what I've had to say. Hopefully some of it was relatable. I feel like to some it may have. So if it was, great. If not, Thanks for sticking around. Anyway, well, I'm going to end this podcast now. This is Tyler, and this is In Perspective. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next podcast episode. Thank you.